Hey folks, this is Tolly and welcome to Let's Build a JRPG part something something. I think we're on cutscene systems is what I've been labeling this. We're on part 2 of cutscene systems. Here again with Drixie this evening.
Hey guys.
Drixie's going to be in the drawing, or going to be drawing in the background like the last video we did like this. Mostly just something to look at while I ramble through building some kind of core systems to the game. Seemed like that worked well. People seem to enjoy it, so we're gonna keep with that. I think, Drixie, you've got some isometric characters you were working on.
Yeah, no, it's been really fun. I'm working. My new pride and joy is this little deer fox. Not quite sure what we're going to call the creature, but it's adorable. But I had this
Lamity?
Lamity, I think is the name we're going for, and it's wonderful. But it is not the direction we want. So I'm going to make a ISO model of that. I got some beautiful references from our concept artist extraordinaire down here for things to draw on.
I believe she wants to go by Jeff. Is the name that she's decided to go by for her alias. But yeah, concept art, which Drixie's using to kind of turn into pixel pieces. So you can see the original Fox character there on the bottom.
Yep.
Drixie's using Pure Ref in order to be able to have all the reference stuff. That's that program. Allows for very easy reference, zoom in, zoom out stuff. But you're going to be working on trying to turn the concept pixeled Lamity land manatee into an isometric character, as well as potentially other concepts. But
yeah, I can go over. I've done a few since the last stream.
Oh, you finished up the dragon, which was the main thing.
There's a dragon. Don't know what color we like the best, but I'm leaning towards the gold myself. But every color scheme can find a home. My variations of the deer, original manatee, and then some other little fellas.
Right, you redid the, oh yeah, the eyes are new, because remember in the last stream we were working on trying to figure out how to make a multi-eye creature. You eventually went back and kind of ran with that.
Yeah, I ran with that. I really wanted to figure out that eye creature, and I discovered, actually, the inspiration got pulled by a sea cucumber. It's a really cool translucent sea cucumber that's just a bunch of air sacs, and I put an eye on it and went with it.
I think the mushroom you also updated.
Yep. Before it was very smooth. It was
way too big, right?
Mushroom, as well. It was too big. Yes. Yeah. I defined the legs a little easier so they have more of an anatomy versus just a sprawling of legs that are conjointed in however abomination it was before. And our little favorite fire rat.
Okay.
Chunks.
I'm gonna switch back over and let you start drawing.
This sounds great.
And I'm gonna dig into some more system stuff. So since we last streamed, which I think was about 2 weeks ago, the main thing I honestly went down a rabbit hole on was just kind of perfecting the look of a lot of the sequences stuff. When we last left off, this was all just stark gray, and it was starting to get hard to read as I started adding some new pieces to it. The main new additions that are like not just visual but new things, I've added 3 new sequence step types: start dialogue, advanced dialogue, and wait for dialogue. These are meant to be kind of the progression system of displaying dialogue. Currently the sequence steps do nothing. Like the other ones change camera priority and stuff, but the dialogue ones at this time are essentially implemented as nothing. So if we go into advanced dialogue internal, it just has a debug log that says that it's advanced the dialogue. So I need to hook that up to actually properly work with a system, and so that system is what we'll start on building today. So the first and most important question is, where do I put my script? Because this is essentially going to be a new controller. I can always move it around later, but for the time being, where do we have like player controller or team controller? Where does that stuff live? Right, technically those are all global managers. So let's stick that in here. Let's make a new script. Dialog Manager. Visual Studio is going to pop up when I don't want it to. Okay, so we want this guy to be a controller, and it's going to need to work similar to how our screen controller works, in that it needs to be accessible from anywhere. So we're going to write this find singleton. We're going to slap that on there. Where was screen controller in the end? Just out of curiosity, where is that one located? Right, that's in like the screen system. I should really consolidate some of this stuff. Also, like, I'm choosing to use the word controller here, whereas down here I'm choosing to use manager. I should really like settle on a naming scheme. Not the biggest deal, but for now we'll keep what we got. So Dialog Manager, we're not going to get fussy about like individual naming stuff. Okay, so what does this thing do? So primarily I think this thing needs to bring up dialogue on the screen. I think for now we'll make it so it's just on the bottom. I think I do remember, Drixie, we went through some concepts where we wanted to have the concept of the dialogue above the character's head at one point. I'm pretty sure we were going with that idea.
Yeah, I think we were, because we wanted to communicate who was speaking. That will be our first idea, unless kind of like a goal will be if we can do a profile picture in pixel or fine detail and have that as a
right
dialogue decoration.
Yeah, but we have more coding time and coding resources than we do art. So yeah, we wanted to put the dialogues on the characters. So it'll be a bit of work to set that up so it will find the character and position correctly every time. But for today, I'll just get it on the bottom, and then I'll worry about figuring out how to position it above the character later. So that means that we want to probably display a dialogue screen. So when we first start our game, we essentially enter into the HUD screen, and if I hit Y, we can go into like the main menu, and that's transitioning between different screens in our screen management system. So I think I need to make a new screen for dialogue, and then I think I want to transition to that dialogue screen when we start. So let's take a look at how we do that for other systems. So we have the front end sandbox. And technically all of it is loaded under these components, but they're all off by default, which is why you don't see them, like the background. Okay, so, which we also have to turn the alpha up in order to see. Okay. So we want to do the same thing. So let's save where we are in this current cutscene trial. Let's head over to the front end, because in order to make the dialogue, we're going to need that UI for it first. So in here, that'll be turned off. Let's add a new set of components. Create an empty, and this will be Dialog Components. And Dialog Components will have essentially under skills we have skill count is just an image with a text. That's a pretty good base that we can work off of. Let's grab that guy. And then let's turn everyone else off. Who is on by... Okay, heal component is off right now. Everything else can get turned back on after. Okay, I just wanted to remember where we're at. Okay, and this can be dialogue... thing? Dialogue thing?
Descriptive.
I'll just call it dialog box for now. This is its background. This is its text. Okay, so let's go see where we write our components. Let's make a new folder under our components section. This will be for the dialog component. This thing is a simple screen component. We're going to duplicate that. So yeah, the whole idea here is that we're basically making our dialogues essentially screens. Okay, Visual Studio is going to go away for a second while we make scripts, because it keeps opening and closing every time I do anything. Let's see. So we're going to basically treat every moment. Has its own screen that appears. It's going to need to take in some data. I don't know what that data is right now. Let's assume for now it's just a string value. Dialog. And then when we refresh the component, this shouldn't be equip anymore. This should be rename dialog text. Dialog text.text is equal to whatever the dialog is. That seems reasonable enough. So this is a dialog box that will take in a string value when we update it, and whenever we refresh it, we will show that value. We refresh on update. So the only other thing we'll have to do is, because we renamed the dialog text field, we're gonna have to recreate that again. So this isn't gonna be a skill. This will be this guy. Okay. And then let's make this dialog box center of the screen. Let's offset it from the bottom. Dialog components, let's make this the size of the screen. Okay. We're at 25, 15 pixels up. And then let's make this, that scales. Let's just make this the size that we think it should be. $350. Okay. And then the text itself, I think we want to have it left align, top left, and then we're going to want it be like 5 pixels in, 10 pixels in from the side. Okay, and then if we went to grab a random description. I can't remember what that's called when you want to grab a paragraph, random paragraph. There's a term for that. Paragraph. Random. I can't remember the term for it. There it is. Okay. The term I was looking for was lorem ipsum paragraphs, which is basically just a bunch of nonsense that look like words. So that should give us a good idea of how that fills in. And honestly, that doesn't look too bad. It's not perfect, but that should do. Okay, so could have just typed random words, but that looks a little better. Now, we need to give this a proper ID, so this is going to be dialog box. And now we need to make the screen that will control this dialog box. We need something that'll actually manage it. So, screen logics. These guys. Under the screen section, we'll do the same thing. We'll make a new folder. We'll call it dialog. We will take a copy of the HUD screen, which I think is the most basic screen that we have because it literally does nothing currently, so it's a great copy. And we will dialog screen. I wish I knew how to make that not happen, but whenever you edit a script in Visual Studio, a new script specifically, Visual Studio opens every single time. Okay, so this one just has a listening for secondary button pressed, which is Y right now, and it opens the main menu. This one is going to need to have a reference to the dialog box in the same way that our other screens do. So if we look at, say, that node screen, skill screen has a reference like this. This will be dialog box. And then the big thing here is that we're going to need to have something that will refresh this dialog box. So up until this point, screens have primarily been things that manage themselves. And by that I mean when we go into even like the HUD example, that's like the simplest one, it's in charge of listening for input and operating and switching states and changing to other screens. The screens handle the input and handle themselves. But this dialog screen, I think I want something else to manage it, which potentially points to this not wanting to be a screen. Okay, I'm going to try not to go down the rabbit hole of thought too much. Let's just implement, and then we can refactor after we get it up and running and we understand it a little better. But the core idea is that when I come into here, I'm going to have my dialog box, and I'm going to want to update that with a string, I think. Temp value. For now, we can just add that, and that'll be what displays in the dialog box. And then, well, I guess I could go back and grab that. Nope, I closed the text paragraph thing. Okay. Temp box. So on open, we'll do that. We don't have to listen for any. Technically, we might want to listen for submit. Is submit currently set up? It is. Currently, when we hit submit button, the screen controller gets the current selected button and calls invoke on it. And then we call submit on the screen. Okay, so we can get the submit call. So we want to listen for submit. And when we hear a submit call, we're going to want to tell probably the dialog manager that a dialog has been completed, essentially. That makes sense. So here we're going to want to notify dialog completed. Let's go back to an oldie but a goodie. Google Drawings. Okay, so we are going to have a Dialog Manager. It is going to receive calls from a couple sequence steps. There's going to be a start dialog sequence step, which is essentially going to be starting the dialogue. It will tell us what dialogue we are expecting to play through. We're going to have advance dialogue sequence step, which I think more specifically is telling us to show the next dialogue. And then we have a wait dialogue step, which is going to be waiting for the dialogue to be finished. And then we're going to have the view part of this. So this is like the data-oriented stuff. The sequence will be kicking these off. The Dialog Manager is going to be doing stuff based off of these things that are kicked off. Because when we advance dialogue, if we look in Unity, the advanced dialogue step takes 2 entries. So, or start and advance. So they take a number of entries. And we can see this cutscene that the UI is currently running off of is running off of this cutscene scriptable object. So this is just a dialogue thing, which will get replaced eventually, but using an addressable scriptable object was very easy to get something like this up and running. So this has a series of pieces of text that we would want to display in order. The way that I think this works is that we call start dialogue on this cutscene asset. It's then going to grab this cutscene asset, grab this data. I did make a bunch of work in between streams, or did a bunch of work in between streams to make this thing super smart. And what it's actually doing is it's grabbing this cutscene ID, loading it in the UI, and then based off the number of entries that we put in, we'll try and display that number of entries from here. So it's reading this data, this isn't editable, this is loaded and reading from this thing. And you can see when I move it, the UI gets kind of confused because now technically this cutscene thing is in transition and the advanced dialogue doesn't know what's going on anymore. But if we drop it back in, it figures itself out. And if we try and go over, it's like indexed out of bounds because we have no more dialogue essentially. So what I expect to happen is if we have, say this, I would expect that we disable player's control. We play these 3 dialogues, so that would be a dialogue appearing with just this text. You hit A on it. You then would be shown this dialogue. Then you would hit A on that. Then you'd be shown this dialogue. You'd hit A on that. And then we would be waiting for all dialogue in this section to be completed until moving on. Once we've gotten a dialogue complete call, so these 3 have been processed or clicked by the player, then we would change the camera and have the camera move, wait for that camera transition, and then I guess technically it'd be more interesting if it was the entity moves to a location, and then we have advanced dialogue where we play these 2 pieces of dialogue. We'd need another wait here, and then probably wouldn't need the wait for seconds anymore. That was mostly because we didn't have anything to pause, but this dialogue would kind of be intrinsically doing the pausing. We'd play these 2 dialogues, do another camera transition, and then we'd give the control back to the player. So...
Pardon, Tohi.
Yeah.
You think my little cow's too small? There's a friend there. He's pretty cute, but he's quite small.
That's a great question. Because technically you're making this guy isometric, so like the one on the right, or would be like, sorry, the actual concept that you pixelized before would be like a combat version of him if he was, because our combat is like side angle, but our exploration and walking around in the world is isometric. And so
We want our heroes, our playable characters, to be the most dynamic and the most attention-grabbing, so I don't mind the fact the creature is smaller, as he's not going to be...
It just makes him more of a sheep and less of a cow in terms of like sizing. But to make him bigger might make him more difficult to deal with in the world. I would try a sized up version. I think that one's fine, but I would try making like a double size one and see if you could clean that up and make it look good as well. I do want to say that I think his tail is a little too long currently in the small version.
His tail's too long?
I would think so. It's based off the concept, I know, but...
No worries.
It seems a little long in that specific version.
That's kind of bugging me too, though. It's a little tail.
Well, I actually think it's not the fluff, but the tail itself. So
okay,
you could...
good, because I like the fluff.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't necessarily saying the fluff. I meant, yeah, more...
A little more stubby?
A little more stubby. And maybe actually it's that it's just very much out there compared to everything else. It's just kind of like...
Yeah.
I guess that's fine. We can always refine more. But from this isometric angle, I would actually think the tail would be more behind him, I guess. So I would expect it to be a little closer to his body and maybe even like a little
the shadowing
hidden.
would be different.
Yeah, because if you look at his version, the concept version, it's that far out because it's side angled. But this one isn't side angled, it's 45. I think that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting tricked up on.
Okay, so I would try tucking the tail in a bit, and then I would also try making him like twice the size.
Because that would be my angles. So, tail should be... Ooh.
Okay, so... Right, so we have Dialog Advancement. So when we do a Dialog Advance, this is essentially the Dialog Manager saying, take these two entries, or the next two entries in the started dialogue, and allow the player to click through both of those. And then once those two are clicked through, then we're going to just wait until the next time we get an advance call to show the next set. So this thing is going to take in a number of entries from either of these things. These things are going to basically pass out a number of entries. Let's do an arrow. These are both going to put out a... Oh, I can just make the font smaller. Can I hold shift to cause it to be perfectly aligned? Okay, let's start over on this one. Create a shape. E entry number. That entry number will then get fed into the Dialog Manager. The Dialog Manager will then take that number of entries, and what is it going to do? It's then going to show dialogue. Which is going to call out to the screen. dialog screen currently? That dialog screen is then going to call out to it's going to wait for submit, which is the player hitting OK on it, which is going to call back to the Dialog Manager. The Dialog Manager is then going to check for more dialogues based off the number of entries that we gave it. And then it's a fun shape.
My Lamity is a fun shape.
If yes, it's going to show dialogue. If no, it's going to contact the wait for dialogue sequence step to let it know that we're done with the current set of dialogue and we can advance further. And I think that's how I want to set this up. That seems reasonable enough to me. So these things set off a number of entries. This thing is then going to show the dialogue, wait for the dialogue screen to hit wait submit. Then it's going to check if there's more dialogues based off the number of entries. Sure. So based off this number of entries, we're going to check if there's more dialogue to show. If yes, then continue showing dialogue until there isn't. If no, wait for sequence step. Okay. We're kind of missing the start part with like how the start is going to handle setting up the very first like cutscene that the Dialog Manager is running through, but I think this is the basic structure of what we're trying to run with.
There we go. No, I don't like the middle one, actually.
I still think his tail could be closer to his body. More tucked behind him, almost.
His tail is super tucked, but I'll try again. Right now, his head was too round.
Okay. So, based off of all of that I just ran through, this is where we're notifying the Dialog Manager. So the Dialog Manager is going to have to tell the dialog screen. That's the part that I don't love. I don't love the idea that the Dialog Manager is saying show dialog to the dialog screen. This is the one connection that feels weird to me with the way that my code is currently structured. But what I guess I can do for now is I can make this a scribble. Scribble's weird. Polyline? Well, that's even weirder. I want to like indicate that this is like I'm not super pleased with, so I remember. Curvy connector. And then can we click on the actual connector itself? We can. Then we can change it to be like an arrow point, and we can make it like dotted, and we can like color it like red, because we're not happy about this. But we're going to do this for prototyping this evening on stream, but we'll probably set up like some sort of direct connection. Okay, so this won't be calling this then. There will need to be some other call. Yeah, there needs to be a better system built around this. Okay, but this will do for this evening. So then let's say that that screen is complete, or complete enough that we can test things. Let's go back to here, and we need to set up that screen. So let's create another empty object. This can be dialog. It's going to need two things. It's going to need the dialog screen that we just made, and it's going to need to reference the dialog box, and it's going to need an entity, and then it's going to need an entity name, which will be dialog screen. Okay. Now, under the transition manager, we're going to need a transition between these, so we're going to create a new transition. We're going to transition from HUD to dialog. What happens when we currently go from HUD to main menu? Close HUD is called. Which turns off the background. We don't care about that for this section. So I think... We'll leave that section empty, which I believe is okay in my system. I think I account for empty. But we will set up a sequence for opening the dialog. That's spelled wrong. Okay. And then we will create a new sequence, which will be dialog. What do we call these? I came up with a naming scheme at one point. I think it's open and close. Yeah, so dialog open and dialog close. Okay. This default color needs to be something. And then in screen transition, when we go from HUD to dialog, we open the dialog. Okay, and then when we go from HUD to dialog, we need to go the other way too. We need to go from dialog to HUD. We will close the dialog. Okay, this makes sense to me. I see a bunch of flaws already, but we're not going to get too deep into it. We'll tackle them once we get this functional. So we're going to turn on the dialog box, and then we are going to turn off the dialog box when we open and close the screen. So essentially when we come into this screen, we're going to show this text box, That seems reasonable. Next step. This is working. This is working. This doesn't auto deactivate. That's good. This is all good. Okay, I think we're ready to test. Or ready to leave this part anyways. I think we have enough of this set up that this should work. Now we need to go back to the actual Dialog Manager. So this guy. So what did we say he needs? He needs basically a show. A check for more. Okay. So this needs a void start dialog, which is not covered by my diagram currently. And this is going to need to take the cutscene ID, and it's going to need to take the initial entries. Then we're going to need an advanced dialog, which is just going to take entry count. We're going to need a dialog completed, I think, which will be this check for dialogue, more dialogues essentially. I think technically there's an internal function as well that's dialog show dialog. Okay. This needs to be public. This needs to be public. This, I think, is internal. This needs to be public. Okay. So, then our sequence steps that we have for dialog is going to need a start dialog. So this is going to do dialog manager dot instance dot start. It's going to take the cutscene ID and it's going to take the number of entries. This guy is going to have a advance call. Which is the exact same, except it only takes the number of entries. And the wait, we have something similar to this for the wait, right? And here, yeah, wait until. So we want to have wait until dialog manager dot instance is showing dialog. I think that's actually a better name for that. And that needs to return a bool. For now, yes, we're always showing. Okay. Cool. I think we've hooked everything up so that the data is all coming in correctly. we are going to be kicking off these things on the right spots. We just need to make this actually contact the screen and handle the advancing internally. So if we take a look at where this cutscene ID is used, I'm pretty sure it's used inside of the GUI. And this is how we load a cutscene object. So we're going to want to do the same thing here in our Dialog Manager. So when we call start, we're going to take a cutscene ID in. We're going to need to use addressables. We might want to do this slightly differently. Dot on complete, completed plus equal. Let's take a quick look at how we do this elsewhere. It's a rough version, but this should work, I think. Yeah, we did this last stream with this guy. Okay, yeah, let's take this as an example. So we're gonna load up the cutscene. We're gonna fail to load cutscene ID. Here we're gonna do operation handler. Result. And we're expecting a cutscene object, so this should have dialogue entries. And then we're going to grab those dialogue entries and we're going to store them locally inside of this guy. So this thing's going to have a list of strings. Dialogues. And that will be equal to these entries. I believe that should work. So when we finish loading, call advanced dialog with the initial number of entries. Okay, so then this is going to say, hey, I want to show entries to show remaining entries to show equal to 0 by default. We're going to set it equal to the entry count. And then we're going to call show dialog. And show dialog is going to need to do entity manager dot instance dot get component. No, instance manager dot get entity by ID. This is the part that's a little hacky right now, but we're just going to grab the screen object. So we're going to expect that screen to exist, and it will be dialog screen. We will then get component and get the screen dialog screen. Ideally, we don't want to do this every time, so instead we're going to write a quick property function. Dialog stream get dialog stream. And what we're going to do is check to see if it's null. And if it is, we're going to do that call I just did down below to go find it. And then we are going to return it. So if it's not null, we've already gone and got it and we can just use it. Otherwise, if it is null, go search for it. It's private. Okay, so now we can just do get dialog screen, show, display. And this is going to show dialog entry how do we figure out what entry we need to show? It's going to be... we're going to need to keep track internally what our current index is. So we're going to need a parameter for that. Current dialog index is equal to 0. On start, we'll set it to 0. When we show a dialog, we will advance that value. We'll do that after we call show. So this should be 0, and then it'll go up every time we show one. And then we are going to also decrease the number of remaining entries to show every time. Hey Theory Infinity. It's not actually Skyrim. It's like some indie music that I originally got off of the Unity Asset Store when I first started this project. It's just real like backgroundy, and it doesn't really distract, but it also keeps it from being purely silent. Minus equal... okay, so showing dialogue, display, plus equal the current number of dialogue entries, minus equal the number of remaining to show. And then we still need one more function. We need a call that comes when we finish hitting pressing A, and so that can be void public void dialog completed. So maybe I did need this function. I think I deleted this a second ago. And when this is called, we're going to check if number of entries to show is greater than 0. Then we will show another dialog, whatever that means. Else, I think we can just do if number of entries to show equals 0, then we're not showing dialogues. No, that doesn't work because we minus this on show. So maybe we need to minus on complete. Then when the player presses A, we minus the number of dialogues we've shown you at this moment. And at this point, if you're at 0, it would show this, and we can move on with our sequences. That might be enough structure to make something actually show up on screen. Let's try it. Okay, so last thing, we need to notify. So when we hit submit, we need to do dialog manager instance dialog complete. I also realized one other thing. We're not actually ever calling open, which is what will make the dialog appear. So I think we do that. Screen controller dot instance dot open screen. And this screen will be opening, I believe this takes an ID. This should be the same ID that we fetch here. What do we normally pass in? Null. We normally pass in null if we don't have any arguments. Okay, and then this is where we need an else, I think. Oh, this is a little different actually. Technically, we don't have a close. We don't close dialog screens. The more I work through this, the more I think a dialog maybe shouldn't be a screen. Because what we do is we have a pop call that just gets called anytime you hit back. Which means if this is a dialog screen, if the player just hits back at any time, they'll end the dialog, which is not what we want. Huh. Okay. Interesting. We can have extra logic in here that says that if it's a cutscene, you can't just escape out of it. That feels a little hacky. Okay, for now, let's ignore that fact. But does that mean that there's no way for me to call pop from outside currently? No, I can pop the screen technically from the outside. And this will be the same call you would normally do, or would normally happen when you hit the back button. Alright. Alright, 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 alright. So, we call show here. We call close here. This needs to be here. This is super fragile. So putting in just the wrong amount of data in the wrong way would completely break this system. But I think it's testable as long as we don't do bad things. Okay, so we need to go to the global and we need to actually set up this new controller. So this is going to, or this manager. So this is going to be the Dialog Manager. Dialog Manager. Okay, save that. Now we go back to the cutscene logic. Our cutscene, if we just double check it, should try and start a dialogue, play 3 entries, wait, have the character start moving. We don't have anything to to see if the player has reached their destination, which is possibly a new sequence step I'll need to add at some point. But for now, we'll just probably rearrange this wait seconds to be there, and then we will advance the dialogue the last 2 steps, wait for that dialogue to be completed, and then move on. Alright, here we go. See what happens. Did I see some errors? Oh, it's just with my UI. My UI is a little upset sometimes. So we move up to here. Villain says, now is the end. Oh, we didn't wait for the dialogue. And then stuff broke because we didn't wait for the dialogue. Okay. That kind of did things, though. So the wait for dialogue didn't trigger. I think I know why. There was some stuff I was trying to do before the stream. Or not before the stream, but recently. But I only noticed right before we started the stream that this stuff is kind of broken. I'm trying to set it up so that we have this kind of composite sequence step that actually like will create 2 sequence steps internally based off of what we're doing. But that seems to be kind of busted. So we're going to just instead go into advanced sequence step internal. And we're going to try and have to manually set these up. So this guy is still called advanced, uses the same color, doesn't have a weight, and doesn't auto indent. This is some metadata tags that basically tags this class, which then my system uses to figure out... Grab this one. Which then my system uses to figure out how to display them. I don't think we need this. So like the sequence tag, sequence dialog tag is the thing that's embedding the story data directly into the UI. And then obviously the color tags are coloring the things. Why are you upset? Okay, you're fine. So then there should be under internal now. Oh, one last thing I need to do is I need to make them serializable so that they'll actually show up as objects that can be added to my UI. Because of the way that I've written stuff, it's too hard to explain everything. It's fine. So we come into here. So now under the internal folder, click off and on again. Under the internal folder, we can add the internal start dialog step. Does it break everything? Does not. Okay. And then we replace this other one with this one. We remove this for now because it's just not working and I want to dig into that off stream. It's going to be a big question mark to figure out how that stuff is broken. And then this is the advance. Okay, that'll go here. We remove the one that has the weight bool on it, because again, that's the one that's trying to be a joint one, but it's just not working. And then let's see if this works. I think the combining sequence steps are just fundamentally broken right now. Okay, that shouldn't have happened. Okay, again, we are not waiting on the dialogue. I still stand by switching to the base internal one though, because the other ones are just kind of buggy. So, but there may be other problems. So let's dig in. It is displaying, which means our Dialog Manager is hooked up correctly. So it is getting into advanced, and it's clearly calling this show screen. So the issue is that the wait one, this wait on dialogue, should be blocking the sequences. It's this guy. This is our problem. Okay, so how do I fix this one? This is my editor for showing all my stuff. I want to grab start dialog. This thing. Async operation handler. So okay. Now what I can do is if result is done, then I can call result complete. Is that not how you do that? Oh, then I can just do the things. Okay, so then this needs to be separated somehow. For now, I'll just duplicate. This is how I do this. Okay, so what I'm doing here is essentially, the problem is that, let's talk about the problem. The problem is that when we call this complete call, this is saying when this thing is finished loading, run this code. But this is not getting called right away because it's taking a bit of time to load up. It takes at least one frame. What we can do instead is say, hey, try and load it, and then we can check to see if it's already loaded by checking if it's done. And if it is, then we can just immediately advance the dialog, which is going to have it so that we have set our remaining entries to show immediately. And then, because that happens in this advanced dialog call. Meanwhile, in here, this might still pause. Because what's happening is if we ever get into here where we get in and it's not already loaded and we have to load for just a frame, everything will break because we'll get to this, the wait call, we'll see it as 0, and then a few seconds later we'll come in, or even a few milliseconds later we'll come in and find out that actually we're done and we want to advance this value. So I think the safest bet is as soon as we get in here, before anything else, we're just going to set this entry count to the initial entry count. And this will get reset the first time we call advanced dialog, whether that's in here or in here, we'll set it again. But that shouldn't matter because that shouldn't be stopping anything if we're doing things correctly. Again, everything's very fragile. The whole code base is built in such a way right now that like doing things slightly out of order will cause everything to just kind of be busted. So I need to make it more robust over time, but let's just see if we can get it to work. So we don't move, but the camera did move. And now the camera, that's still not working. Let's add a breakpoint into wait, because I'm making a bit of an assumption right now on how this is operating. Let's actually put the wait in is showing dialog. And then let's also put a wait here on start. I'm guessing at what I think is happening, but my solutions from the guesses didn't just solve it, so let's actually just look at the actual data. We're hitting some random breakpoint, don't care. Okay, start dialog is being called. We have set the remaining count to 3. Okay, we are inside of the start initial. That all seems fine. So I would expect now at this stage that we should then go into the next sequence step, which should be waiting. Let's take a look at our current sequence steps. We have a player control, start dialog internal, wait, set priority, delay, advanced, wait, set priority, wait, turn control. Yeah, that all looks right. Okay, and so we are currently on, if we add a watch, sequence step I is a wait step, okay. It is blocking. We are getting into here. We are finding our instance. Is showing. Is the last step here simply that this is saying is showing? If it's not 0, we're showing. That's the problem. I feel like that still doesn't make sense why it was breaking in the first place. Okay, we're getting here. We're getting there. Dialog is 3. Dialog is 3. 3, 3. Yeah, okay, we're stuck on the wait. Okay, so now we're stuck here where this dialog is being shown now is the end. Now, if we hit enter, which is our submit key, something broke. Okay. This assumes that we always have a currently selected object. In this situation of this cutscene, we don't. So we need to have an if currently selected object does not equal null that wraps this whole thing, which is a valid situation that we can get into. Under our new system. Let's just stop debugging because I think we're okay now. Okay. And we walk up. Dialog appears. Everything waits until we're done with this dialog. So if we hit enter, or is it? Yes, it is. Now, when I hit enter this third time, this should be the third entry. We should close the dialog window, so this dialog should go away. The character should move to position. Once they reach position, then we should wait. Yeah, we're gonna move and wait 5.5 seconds, which should be about time for them to get into position. Then we will display this. Then there'll be a bit of a reset after we hit hit enter 2 more times. Transitioning. No, this is the end. Secondary character. Le gasp.
Best
and
line ever.
We have control. Okay. Cool. That worked exactly how I thought it would. Again, super fragile. And by that I mean if we do some stuff out of order, the whole thing just falls apart, which is not what you want out of your dialogue system. You want it to be robust. Like, for example, if I was to accidentally call advanced dialogue, so say I was to have like advanced dialogue, wait for character move, advanced dialogue, and then there's a wait at the very end here, ideally the system should be able to handle that. So if we, not that one, I want to use the internal version. This should technically work. So let's start with this as like a use case of why my system is fragile and see if we can fix this use case. So in this situation, what I would expect to happen is that the number of dialogues to advance, when we call advanced dialogue, should not be set. It should be incremented. And we should only open the screen if we're not showing. So if not showing dialogue, then we should open the dialogue screen. this should be entry counts to add, just renaming for the sake of clarity. And this should be plus equals. That means that when we advance dialog, these should be 0 now because we're setting the initial amount on start. And so we're not increasing the count. The count should already be set. This causes a problem, however, because now technically we get in here and the value is something, so we'll be technically considered showing. Hack, 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 hack. So instead, we'd have to call show here and here instead. Ugh, gross. Because again, what this is doing is checking to see if this value is not equal to 0. And so if we're setting it above, and then we check to make sure whether or not it's not equal to 0 before showing the screen, it's not going to work. I think more... I think trying to use the remaining entries as like a whether or not we're showing dialogue is tricky because it's not entirely true. It's the moment that we open the screen that we're technically showing the dialogue. So maybe we should just have a more rather than trying to reuse this value, we might want to just more explicit dialogue in progress, which is false by default. And then remaining dialogue entries is equal to this value. Set it to true here. Set it to true here. And let's set it to false here. Let's just be consistent. Is showing dialogue. And reading that aloud, I realize there's an ing missing here. Okay, so now we're explicitly saying when we are and aren't showing dialogue. We technically still need to call this immediately. We don't need to call this anymore because we can just have these increment the values, and this is no longer tied. So now we just have to call showing dialogue true here to make sure that we catch this right away. We just need to make sure this is happening right away. Okay, so let's go back into here. Now, my expectation is if we come up to here, well, we broke something. Oh, this logic is still flawed. By setting this early, we never call open. Same problem. Changing it to the bool instead of the integer didn't actually solve our issue. hate it. Let's do that hack for now. I want to change it again in the future, but for now this should be fine. The only thing that makes this slightly awkward is that we're technically showing the dialogue, and then if this complete call takes a little bit, because the addressable loading sync might take a little bit of time before it actually finishes loading, then this may have empty dialogue for a few frames. Okay, so I think we fixed it now by the advanced dialogue being a plus equals, though, at the very least. That in this situation here, we should have it so that the dialogue will display, no, this is the end, as the character is moving. And if the player hits enter during that movement, it goes away, but when we get there, le gasp. Okay. However, if we don't press anything, and this is kind of the real edge case, our system should now account for that and instead just add an extra entry to the entry. So if we don't push anything, we wait until the character gets there, we'll give it an extra. That's a problem. So this is why the system's fragile. I wouldn't want it to call show. Right. Because when we call show, we call display on the current index, and then we increment the index. Problematic. So the fact that our advanced dialogue also calls show is less than ideal. Okay, first step on entering, increment the count. Then, if then we can do this. That works, I think. Increment the count. If we're not showing dialogue, then open the screen and show the dialogue. No, because then that breaks with this section up here again. The other option is right before we enter this function, we call false, so that the wait catches it. But I'm not sure if that's if the wait is gonna wait until is gonna catch that momentary blip where we set it to false and then immediately set it back to true again in this function. We can try. All of these things are still fundamentally wrong, though. It points to the fact that maybe our data needs to be structured a little bit differently. 1, 2, 3. Display this. We're going to wait once the character gets here for a little bit. Okay, nothing appeared. We hit enter. We get the second dialogue and then it closes. Okay, so that's now working as intended. We didn't hit the toggle of the wait until, and then we can double check to make sure if we hit enter right away on this as the character's moving, we should still have the gasp as the final one here. And then after we hit enter on that, we finish. Okay, cool. I'm pretty happy with that. Again, I think there's still something fundamentally wrong about the way that I have to call like showing dialogue is true immediately, then have to set it to false before calling advance. This is just all kinds of not great. But it's mostly to do with the fact that we have to call like, hey, I want to grab my cutscene data at this moment. The other option is that we could call the advance earlier. Like right now my start dialogue is trying to do both at the same time, but maybe start dialogue needs to be at the very top of the step and advance comes late. I don't. There's something weird about this. Let's go look at art. Hi, how's art?
I challenged myself with a mimic, and challenging it is.
Something about the box, right?
It's all about the box. You would think it'd be easy, but the littlest thing can make it look lopsided or crooked. Like this one just doesn't see, like it defies physics. It's just there's something really not right about it. So a lot of counting, a lot of playing around. This was the original. I still like him.
He's probably still the best, honestly.
Easily. But he's not quite giving me that puppy attitude.
Mm.
There are lots of beautiful things. This is just a cutie. I like him. This is the closest one to what we need. But it's a good reference, but it's still not working out for me.
Do you want to switch back to the concepts?
Yeah, I think so. I just got a little bit of a break, but I've gotten more practice on boxes, that's for sure. Nothing wrong with practice.
Oh, you lost a little bit of your platform.
It was never there.
Which concept are you gonna look at next then?
I don't know. Should put it to a vote. Give me a second. Oh, ah. Excuse me?
It's not real.
None of it's real. Again.
You put it on the wrong layer.
Standard procedure. And yet that's not working. Did I lock it? I locked it on accident.
You just erased over it.
Yep, that's the plan. It just doesn't have to be perfect, this one, because it's just for
reference.
dimensions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fair.
Yeah. There we go. Still, nice to have it clean. Good, good.
Yeah, I don't think we got a lot of people in chat today. But if you want, it's probably not enough people for us to successfully be able to run a poll.
No.
Let's take a look at the concepts. What do you got?
Got a really cute llama, or a lamity, which we have done here.
Can we see those guys actually? I don't think I got to see the finished version.
Here's our little friends. I have them lined up on the old monsters too.
I don't love them as much as I love the deer.
Yeah, the deer is kind of played out a little bit easier.
Hmm.
A little easier with the legs, I find. As soon as you get chubby legs, they get a little more harder.
That's fair.
Maybe that's just me though. I feel like the biggest one the best. So I will come back and I play with things later on.
Yeah. No.
You know, I've obviously have to polish up mega chunks here. I don't know if this rat's consistent with the art style. Maybe too much shading. Might have to tone that one down depending on what things go about. He's another one I had to polish up. I do love my green goo. He's one of the first ones.
I'd like to see one of the concepts though from the bottom peer ref area.
Mm-hmm.
What I either so I would say the lizard is the one that I'd be most interested in seeing. Trying to figure.
Oh, he's supposed to be 4 feet tall and jumps. He's a mount.
Yeah. So he's supposed to be a bit taller, but I think trying to do a slightly bipedal creature like that could be interesting.
Mm.
The woolly rhino is going to be similar to what you just did with the land manatee.
Yeah.
What else do we got to the right?
There's another cow. We got some spirits. These are monster critters. These ones are from the fields.
Yeah, those
I
are
do love this one.
They were meant to be monsters to fight, not
There's the
ISOs.
original goo.
Hmm.
Bugs. Chunks.
I think probably the lizard is where I would vote.
The mount?
Yeah, I think that's another challenging one, though. Yeah, I would probably start by just pixelating it like 2D like you did the other ones. But to ISO that one, I think is going to be a bit of a journey.
I'm gonna have to find some references of real lizards.
Well, I think for the pixelization, it should be pretty straightforward. But the ISO version is going to be like a creature that's like bipedal but leaning forward really heavily.
Yeah. It's gonna be an interesting one, that's for sure.
Okay.
I'm excited to dive into that. I still have lots of pictures of lizards already in my reference file here, so I'm just gonna pull it up. Especially for colors. Because colors is a big one for him. I don't remember what region he's from. Probably green?
I'm fine with starting with green, because you usually color tint them anyways.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with the palette starting on green and see where that goes. Okay, so as for my stuff, I hate this, and I hate this. But I don't necessarily have a great solution to it right now. I'm going to think on that. What else do I want to try and tackle with this? So one thing that's weird is still the fact that I'm grabbing the dialogue screen. I do wonder if this needs to be a dialogue screen at all. I think that it is fair that I would want to like close the HUD when we go into this. So like technically when we... Let's start there. Let's start with the HUD. Let's modify that to actually have some information on it, because I think that'll better illustrate to myself what I'm trying to do. So if we go to here, and let's add a new component, and this component can be HUD components. And for now, the HUD component doesn't even need to actually be a thing, or have a script attached to it. Let's just duplicate this thing. Let's remove the dialog box. Let's have it auto deactivate. Let's call it HUD component 1. HUD component. Background's fine. We can kill the name. Okay. So then let's grab this and like let's slam this in the bottom left section of the screen. And like maybe this is where we would show like the stats of the character on the HUD. Like their current health and MP, kind of as a quick reference when you're walking around in the dungeon. So then when we go into our HUDs, I think what we need to do is we're going to rename these from menu, and then we're going to say that we are going to set active the HUD component before the fade, and then after the fade here we're going to turn off the HUD component. Turn on, turn off. Okay, then we're going to create 2 more of these, and this is going to be from cutscene and from cutscene. Then we're gonna do, we don't need this fade or this background, and we don't need this fade We do need that though. Okay, and then on-screen transitions, when we go from HUD to cutscene, we're going to call close, which is going to turn off the HUD component. And then on this is going to be open HUD from cutscene. I think these are backwards. This should be in the closed section. This should be in the open section. Okay. And that should be pretty rudimentary, but that should show what I'm trying to get at a little bit better. So if we go back into the cutscene, when we hit Y here, oh, interesting. So this HUD components actually needs to be behind the background. That's a bit counterintuitive because I did like my organization of this. Alright, fine. Let's see where that takes us. And it starts off by default, but if I go out and then back in again, it's on. I'm going to assume that that's when we call open right now. Ooh, that's a good question. How do we open the first HUD? When the HUD first starts, is it coming in from any transition at all? I think this guy opens initial screen. And when we call open on that initial screen, close transition will be null. I don't think our transition manager has a case for that. Yeah, we don't. Interesting. So we don't have a way of triggering a transition for the first time the HUD is opened. So based off of that, I think the tweak, which is again kind of counterintuitive and I don't love it, is that this doesn't have an auto deactivate on start. It just wants to be on at the start of the game. That will change as we have like different states. I think it's, yeah, it's hard to articulate that, but this is on. Okay, so this is open, this is on. Now if I enter into the menus, it looks a little weird with the fade, but essentially it almost looks like this is fading out, but what's actually happening is the other thing's fading in over top of it. But that's the HUD piece. But when we go into the cutscene, what I'm trying to get at here is that we want to have it so that disappears. Let's play with that a little bit. So these are the cutscene versions. So on close, instead of having that happen instantaneously, let's translate UI. Let's translate the HUD component. Let's say 200 to the off screen to the right and down 200 over 2 seconds. Let's have that be blocking. And then we're going to want to reverse that. So here in this one, we're going to want to translate the UI, translate the HUD component, negative 200 and 200 over, actually probably like half a second is more reasonable. So this should kind of move it off screen by like diagonally. So when we come up to here, it should transition off. Interesting. Actually, that told me a lot. Because technically every time we open and close the screen, we're reopening the HUD. Oh, I hit escape, which broke everything also. Feels like it goes down faster than it goes right, so I'm just going to make that 100 instead. So I guess technically we don't want to be opening and closing the dialog screen every time. I think more accurately what we're trying to do is when we enter into a cutscene, where essentially what we're trying to do is just get the HUD off screen. And we're doing that by opening into a dialogue screen. But it doesn't need to be a dialogue screen specifically. It really just needs to be a cutscene screen. And honestly, the dialogues themselves that appear and disappear, I think it doesn't make sense for that to be handled by the screen itself. Because then we're getting into this weird thing where we have to have the Dialog Manager contacting the screen to open it, and then waiting for the dialog screen to hit submit before moving on. And like that is hooking into our input system in a way that doesn't require us to have to create input systems for the dialogue system specifically, but I think this feels weird to me. And it's going to get more weird as the dialogue system gets less just turning on an object and more like, hey, I want to display an object over a specific character entity. Fascinating. So I think that the dialogue is still a UI component. I think it's still something that appears on the screen, but I don't think it should be managed by a screen. I think that the Dialog Manager should more so just be creating dialogue prefabs and then positioning them over characters. And I think that's important because you might have multiple dialogue up at the same time is another thing. Right now we have this one dialogue box, but you might have situations where you have multiple characters speaking, and we might want to leave up their dialogue boxes until they say something else. Depends on how complicated I want to make the system. But overall, opening and closing the screen yields this like opening and closing of the HUD every time, which definitely doesn't make sense. The other option is that we open from the HUD to a cutscene screen and then from the cutscene screen to a dialogue screen, but that just seems even more like I want to use the screen system to the utmost potential, but I don't think this is the case for it. Okay, let's change things up a little bit. How do we enter into the screen? Because Because, like, I might not even want to display dialogue right away. I might want to start with the camera pan, right? Like, if we just change some of these pieces around a little bit, technically the HUD is going to stay on here while the camera pan is happening, but I would want that dialogue to go away immediately. So I think the transition into like a cutscene screen out of the HUD needs to be not tied to the dialogue. That needs to be tied to us entering into a cutscene. Okay, there's two ways that we can handle that. Number one, we make a new sequence step, which is like the change screens and lock or something like that, because it needs to also lock you out of like being able to hit the back key. And we make a new sequence step that at the start of every sequence we enter into the cutscene screen. At the end we always leave essentially and go back to the HUD. Or we have it be more automatic, because we do have this object have a trigger that actually calls the cutscene from here. I want it to be explicit. It's going to be annoying to have it be a sequence step that I always have to remember to add and position to the top and make sure that nothing gets in front of it, but it also gives me more control. If we make it a sequence step to like exit the HUD and into this cutscene view where like we get rid of all the HUD elements, we have the control that if we really wanted to, we could have a camera transition with the HUD on before transitioning off. And I think I want that flexibility. Okay, so let's come at that from a different angle then. Let's make a new cutscene sequence step. Do we have anything that's just kind of empty? Let's copy this one. Let's name this screen transition sequence step, because this also might be a useful sequence step actually for if we were doing tutorialization. So like, hey, auto opens the main menu and then makes you have to click on a bunch of stuff to teach you how to do like skill upgrading or whatever we have in the game. Like having a step to make you open the screen or to auto open the screen and then take you to a specific section could be valuable. It may not even need to belong under the cutscene folder. It might be like under UI. For now, we'll leave it there. So let's grab this guy. Let's rename that. Rename that, rename that, rename that. What does this thing take in? It's not an entity to move. It is screen ID. I don't think it's an entity-based one. It can just be a default logic sequence step. And then it doesn't need any of this stuff. Renaming variables mostly. Okay, and then it's not going to need this, and it's not going to need any of this. Instead, it's going to do screen controller dot instance dot open screen with the ID and null. Okay. It's non-blocking. It can't pause the game or anything. It's just, hey, I'm going to open a screen. Might eventually want like a screen transition blocking or something to make it so that we have to wait for the screen transition to finish. Could see that being a thing. For now, though, this will probably be fine. The next thing is, do we want to have some sort of like... some sort of way of blocking cancel? What would that look like? What would that look like if we had essentially a private bool block back input? What is it actually? It's cancel. Which is off by default. And then we could have a function void set block cancel input with value, and then block cancel input. If screen count equals 1, or we set blocking. That seems semi-reasonable, I think. We're kind of running into data validation issues now, though, because if we set this up in the way that I'm about to, we're going to run into an issue where if someone sets blocking to true, like a designer, like mainly me, and I set the value to true, and then on the end of the sequence I don't turn it off, then all of a sudden players will never be able to hit back ever again, which is less than ideal for sure. Huh. I think it's that I need like some sort of like it's probably more so on like a data validation side. It's not necessarily a problem with like the way the code is written. It's just I might need some sort of check to be like, hey, make sure that all of my sequences, run through and check everyone, load everyone up, and make sure that there is always a block turned off at some point in them. I don't need to set a default value for that. Actually, maybe I do want to set one. All right, with great power comes great responsibility. transition. We will start by transitioning to the dialog screen. And we will block input. And at the very end of our sequence, UI we will go back to the HUD, which I think is just HUD, and we will unblock. Okay. And then we will get rid of all of this opening and closing dialog screen stuff. I just realized this doesn't work the way I think it does. Interesting. The problem is I'm calling open HUD. Technically in my system, that's opening the HUD over top of the dialog. What I need to do is pop at the end. So technically that needs to be a different sequence step. Okay. So we're going to copy this guy again. We'll make a pop screen sequence step. Boy, oh boy, do I love how easy these things are to make. Alright, so we make a new one of these, and then I don't think we give it any values. I think this is where we have it, so it always sets it to false. Whoa. Okay. We always set it to false when we pop, because otherwise we can't pop, so we have to set it to false as like a first step. And then we call pop screen. And then this doesn't have any extra constructor logic, it simply just is. And this is now pop screen. Just want to make these a slightly different color than some of the other stuff. These maybe should go in like a screen folder too. So then this, don't know if I love it, but I can play with the color later. Let's remove that, and so now we would have a UI, no, cutscene, pop screen. Takes no parameters, it just pops the screen. Alright, so we come up here, we exit, the dialog comes up right away. Okay, bunch of weird things happen there. Some of it probably will make sense if I think about it for half a second, but let's see where we're at. So let's go back to this happening here, because that might be part of the thing too. So we're going to have it so the these things happen simultaneously, and we wait for both of them to be done before we move on. I want to see what that looks like. And then what if we did delay? I'm just playing now. What if we had a 0.5 second delay before we turn off the dialogue? So we're going to come up to here and transition. Dialogue appears. Okay. Enter, enter, enter. I think this is displaying... Huh. Okay. So this is all working, technically. It's doing what I'm expecting. Let's go back to having the wait here. The next piece of the puzzle to me is sadly a bunch of renaming, which I'm not going to do on camera, but I think I'm going to change the name of what I've just made the dialogue screen to like the cutscene screen, because you're just entering into a cutscene. And then I think the opening of the dialogue itself, I don't want to have be part of the screen logic. I do think I want to rip that out. So let's maybe take a quick dive into that. How is art doing though? Let's do a quick check-in on this.
I made a pretty cool teal lizard. Because he is side to side and not isometric, I made him a wild one with no saddle.
Okay.
So I did the isometric one, which will be a tame one because it's overworld. I am thinking saddled.
Okay.
But also just the base design. What do you think of the stripes?
Pretty good. Whoa.
He's dancing.
Roof lizard. Huh.
The stripes are just an extra design. I'm trying to... I don't need to go as far detail in all my designs right now. I can always detail them up later, but I figured give it a shot.
Yeah.
I'm not liking the highlights here. I'm trying to add more details, but lizards are scaly, and I don't really know how I'm going to detail scales without being too busy, without being too noisy.
That's fair. I actually like those highlights. I thought that they really did a good job of like breaking that up. I can see removing a little bit of it so it's not all the way continuous. It actually kind of falls apart as soon as you... Oh,
Yeah.
No, I think that was okay. Just give it takes a second for the brain to adjust.
Yeah.
I would get rid of the bottom one though.
I think that bottom one was too...
Oh no, sorry, the bottom pixel
Oh, okay, hang
of
on.
the arm.
I was gonna fix that, 'cause I think I was too...
Oh, yeah.
Gave him a bigger jumping thigh, right? And that's all regular shadow. I feel like that should be like that.
Yeah, I think that looks super good. I'm just trying to find something to pick apart on it just to give you some criticism, like some constructive criticism. But I'm actually, I think that's pretty solid.
Yeah, how's his stance? He doesn't look too like he's gonna fall over?
I think he's okay. He does look very flat in that you're missing a bit of like his back arm and back leg. I know that the concept had them very paired together, but I think that you could maybe give the back leg a little bit more dimension or a little bit more visibility. I'm not sure. I almost feel like that back foot is too close to his front foot. Like I would almost see its, I'd almost like to see its height adjusted up a bit. So that it feels a little bit more like he's planting a little further apart on his feet.
That's cool because I've already done that once. So I'm going to do that again.
Why didn't you keep it, if I may
No,
ask?
I did it once already. It was already once over. I did keep
And I
it.
could be wrong, but...
I could try it though. So like that, once up.
Yeah.
Oh.
Theory Infinity says for scales, maybe just break up the solid color with impending lighting and the assumption that the scales are reflective. Implied lighting and the assumption that the scales are reflective. Not sure is that Not sure that is viable with this pixel count though. Yeah. I was thinking kind of something similar, like maybe just a couple of your highlight colors scattered across the body might also help a little bit.
Kind of like how we have Fire Rat. Because Fire Rat has the... Oh no.
Not sure if that is viable. Yeah, no, sorry, I couldn't process. Yeah, a little bit like Fire Rat.
A little smattering, but like the note here is if it's question mark too much detail on it, right?
For sure, but I think not that much detail. It could literally just be like Fire Rat had like a lot, but you could just try a couple pixels just sporadically around. Yeah, even that adds a bit more scale to him. I don't know about that last one you did near the bottom. No, okay. I don't even think that much. I think like like something like that. I would sit on that for a little while and just kind of not mess with it too much, but just even adding the 2 pixels in between the arm and the leg gives a little bit more feel that he's like not all one solid color.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. It's the pixels, all the illusion of a thing.
The impression.
The impression. There's the words you say all the time that I always forget.
There we go. Now that's an arm. Now that's what I'm talking about. So we're gonna put Mr. Lizardman in the safe home of all monster page. Oh, what's his size next to our friend? Haha! You think he can ride him?
Yeah, that actually looks pretty good.
I like it.
Whoa, whoa.
Don't worry, going everywhere.
Okay.
Now my favorite part.
Let's get the dialogue off the dialogue screen.
Ooh.
Oh, sorry. You're doing the best part.
I am doing the best part. I love colors. And this just makes everything so much easier. Let's do a dark blue. A steel. Gunmetal blue, I'm going to call that one.
Something a little bit more hot, the warmer color for the last one. Because right now you've got 3 very cool ones. Something in the yellowish range, maybe? Like a sand desert color? I don't know if you can find that.
Getting a hue shifted very well, actually. That's nice.
Might have to play with the other sliders, or I don't know how your sliders work. Okay, leaving you to it.
Cool. I like that last one actually quite a lot. Probably have to tone down the new stripes, but he's a very pretty boy.
Yeah, the contrast is a bit high now.
Yeah, I like it. A little drama. Can I just turn down the contrast this way? There you go.
Oh, he's so muted now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now he's soft.
You gonna try and ISO him now?
Now that is the question. I think I want to do some research on lizards before I ISO a lizard. I had this guy go off pretty well because I kind of studied that kind of creature type.
You could use the Chocobo from Final Fantasy Tactics as reference.
That's fair.
I'm pretty sure he was a monster, so there might be some reference you can find on how that was structured, because that should give you an idea of a bipedal creature with a heavy front.
Yeah.
So I would maybe use that as a reference point for structuring.
Getting on it.
Okay, back to me. I'm thinking about how I can break the dialogue out of the screen itself. So currently we have it set up so that we contact the dialog screen to show the dialogue. What if instead the Dialog Manager just showed the dialogue? Now it does probably still need to be under this UI component, so we'll probably still need to attach it somewhere in here.
Oh, the chocobos are in bits.
Oh, there's not like a good single reference. You'd have to assemble them.
Yeah.
But which assembly pieces go with which?
That is the question. Aw, he's got little legs to sit down.
That's when he's sad. Same.
Who hurt you, Chocobo?
Lots of people hurt the chocobo.
No!
I'm gonna leave you to your assembly.
Yeah, Chocobo's not listening to me. His feet are big.
That may not even be the... Oh, actually, yeah, that kind of just goes together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
His wing is pretty huge. I'm gonna just go back to your screen. His wing is pretty huge in that it like feels like it takes up a fair amount of his body space,
Takes
and it
up
almost
all of
makes
his
him.
body.
It almost feels like he's turned more, almost like in another direction, but it's not. He is still like his. If you look at his chest line is still in that kind of 45.
Yeah, his wing starts here, but like his wing is his entire body.
Yeah. Which may make him not a great reference, but he was the only bipedal creature I could think that was like mountish.
No, it's a good thought, definitely.
Could still start with that and see if you can find something from there, but you might have to find more references.
Yeah, I'd go dig somewhere.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna add a component to this, an entity, and we're gonna call this Dialog Parent. So this is where dialogues we'll find this object and then we'll stick our dialogue objects underneath of it. And then we will not turn the dialogue on. Just disable it. That's easy, quick, fast approach. We're gonna... Oh, we're running right now. None of this makes sense. I need to do all that in the actual scene. So front end component. Dialog parent. Okay, and then we're gonna auto deactivate this thing, and I've changed the sequence so it won't get turned back on. Seems reasonable. And then that should be all we have to do here. Now I need to go back to the main scene, and well, actually, what if we made the dialog box a prefab? Where do we keep the other prefabs? Here. Let's make another one for front end. Give it a folder, call it dialog. Most of these are menu buttons. Just drag this in here to make a prefab of it. Then we're going to remove this. We're going to remove this. We'll leave that. I think they were attached. Yeah, I disconnected them by hitting back enough. Okay, so then we have this dialog box. Let's make a new pooling object. Dialog. Pool. Let's say that we only ever expect there to be like 4. And this is the dialog. That takes this object. Okay. And then now we'll have it so that when we run the game, there will be 4 dialog objects that we can grab from this pool when we need them. Sweet. I never realized that that creates an interface object like that. Oh, this is the default. What's the default look like? Oh, interesting. A bunch of stuff breaks if I do that wrong. So what does this have to be? This has to be a poolable object. That's why it's doing a weird thing with that default object. Interesting. And then what is this item that we're taking in? That's the stored data for this thing. Okay. So I think for now that's simply string. I think we will eventually have like a dialog object that will pass around. Let's implement all of this stuff. Don't need this one. We're just hooking this thing up. It already has an initialize. All right. Okay, so we've now hooked this thing up to be a string thing. Apparently we didn't implement a terminate. Cool. That's replaced by stored data now. Okay, so now this is a poolable object that we can manipulate. And so if we hit run again, yeah, this doesn't create the weird object thing anymore. Cool. So now we have it so we can use this? Question mark face? Let's go take a look at our manager. How does our manager work? Dialog Manager. So instead of calling... so we definitely don't need open screen. And ideally, we're not going to need this anymore either. We're just going to get rid of all of that. Instead of calling display, what we're going to do is we're going to grab the pool, this guy. How do we do that in other components? We have like our skill menu list. Does this do something? Skill menu button. Yes. Okay. So we do pool management instance allocate ID, and this will give us the object we want. The question is, do we want a list of them? This thing kind of has this weird list structure. For now, let's assume we do. We'll future-proof ourselves by using this list object. And then this thing is going to be a list of string-based objects. And then we're going to grab this exact call here. This part, just this part. And then instead of skill button, what we're grabbing is dialog is the ID. So we're going to grab a dialog, passing in this as the dialog information we want to display on it. Oh, it's a string, but we don't have to pass it as a string. And then dialog object, we want to get the parent, and this will be done by entity manager dot instance dot get entity by ID, and we're going to get the entity, no, dialog parent, and then we will do dot transform. Cool. Then we don't have to do this call. I don't know what this is going to do. This is either just going to work or it's just not. I mean, those are the two options, aren't they? Let's go to the actual cutscene scene so that we can see what happens when we run it. So that's the not variation. It didn't do what I thought it was going to do, but let's see what it accomplished. So it did make a dialog box. Oh, look at that, right there in the middle of the screen. Is it tiny? So compared to the one that it cloned off of, its position is 700. That seems weird. What if we made it like 15? Then it shows up. Okay, so we need to set its position value. So we set its parent, but we just need to line it up to be on screen. So it kind of worked. So then we need to do dialog.transform.anchored .get component rect transform, which is the UI transform that you work with, and then anchor position is equal to new vector 2 of 0 and 15. Hard-coded numbers are bad. Don't care. Moving on. We'll fix it in post. So in theory, I should be able to walk up here, have a dialogue display. Now, that should have created 3, 4 different dialogues at this point. So if we take a look under the front end, I would expect that there are 4 different dialogues. Components, dialogues, there are. And that would be all 4 of them from the pool. Because right now, we're not deleting them. We are simply just adding a new one, adding a new one, adding a new one. So what we need to do is, on dialog complete, not only do we need to reduce the entries, we need to clear. So then if we look at the scene, we look at the front end, look at the components, look at the dialogue. There's one dialog box, we hit enter. There's still one dialog box, still one dialog box. Okay. So by calling clear, we're basically saying reset and get rid of all of those things that we're creating and adding to this game object pool list. So this is adding it, this is clearing it. And now we're no longer reliant on the screen to manage the dialog boxes opening and closing. Now the Dialog Manager is in charge of that, which I think I'm okay with. It's literally the Dialog Manager. It can be in charge of generating and setting up these dialogues. This also means that we can control the position. Like I was saying in the beginning, we may not always want this dialogue to be here, but we might instead want it to appear above the character's head and look like there's a little speech bubble coming off of them. Now the Dialog Manager can be in charge of that. It does occur to me that we'll need to get that data stored and addressed somewhere, because how do we assign which character it's supposed to appear above? Is that in the cutscene itself? Because right now this doesn't have that data. I think it would have to be in, or in the sequence. It's not in the sequence. I think it's going to be in here. So each of these entries aren't just a string. There's probably a string and which character or which entity we expect to be saying it. Interesting. Okay, there's more data here than I thought originally. Still fine, I just need to adapt some things. I anticipated that this might be more complicated, but I was originally thinking it would be like... I was originally thinking it would have like a character name here and here. So maybe that's it. Maybe the idea here is that we need to have the dialogue, but each dialogue needs to have a character associated with it. And then that character data may have the entity ID for that character. And then if a character isn't found, maybe we just display it on the bottom or on the middle or something. Maybe there can be overrides for no character given. Instead, we want to display the dialogue off camera, because technically, when if this cutscene was built exactly how it is, it's this kind of rudimentary thing we have. If we do it here, it would display above the character's head, above the character's head, above the character's head. Here, the character is moving when we display the dialogue. Does that mean that we need the dialogue to move with them? That makes things more complicated. Maybe I want to add a hard rule just for myself when I'm designing these things. The dialogue can't happen on a moving character. Interesting. I'm liking the feel of this zoom in, zoom out thing, though. That's starting to feel pretty slick. The more I look at it. Let's see. The other option is if we do the camera transition before the dialogue, but before we move the entity. What does this look like? Because I think in this situation, a character would be off camera. And so we might want to have a dialogue that's like pointing off camera, like this dialogue box with a little arrow, and then we want to position it as close to the character that's off camera as possible. That's going to be super hard to do. Or maybe not. I don't know. This is a whole field in and of itself. This will probably take me a couple weeks to get right, is the placement of the dialogue itself, because I hate switching from 2D plane-based position systems to UI-based position systems. It's always such a hassle. Alright, but we kind of got the system up and running, and I'm feeling better about the dialogue controller or manager managing the creation of the dialogues itself. And now what was the dialogue screen, I think, just becomes the cutscene screen. It's just, it doesn't do anything now. I don't think it has any components. It just exists. I saw you lean back, Trixie. What do we got a thing?
We forgot the most famous giant bipedal lizard of all. The T-Rex.
Oh, yeah?
I'm basing him off a dinosaur.
Oh, and there's like isometric versions?
There's isometric dinosaurs for days.
Oh, okay.
Though, I feel like my magic is running low here, so I need time to recharge.
That's fair.
I think Drixie's out for the evening, so you can continue performing your coding magic.
I think we're at a good stopping point, honestly. I think the next big thing is me struggling with off-camera getting the dialogue to appear above the character and making that system work. I think that the dialogue management system is, again, still not perfect in some of the way that some of these things are being written. This on-off that's happening here is still kind of janky to me. But I think that it's okay-ish. Oh, I just got it. Okay, I know what I want to do here. M is loading. This needs to be M is loading. And we don't do this. We say loading is false here.
You gotta put back your screen, right?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll go to me 100%. So I'm gonna finish up this and then I'm gonna call it. So I'm close. But I just realized that I think what I want to do here is M loading is true when we start, M loading is false here, M loading is false, and then we are showing dialogue if we're showing dialogue or if we're loading. I think that was what I was missing this whole time. Let's see if that actually works, but I think that should. And then, yeah, I think we're going to call it here. I think that the systems are in place. I got the Dialog Manager kind of skeleton up and running. We transition. Dialog 1, Dialog 2, Dialog 3. Dialog 4 was a bit broken. Ooh, is dialogue loading set to true somehow still? Interesting. Okay, we'll figure that out, but it's close. I'll figure out that last piece, but this is feeling pretty good. Next steps are getting the dialogue to actually appear over the character, and then probably bringing some of your isometric characters in.
I'll polish something up for next time.
Yeah, so that I can start having maybe two characters walk into dialogue with each other.
Definitely the deer.
Definitely the deer. The deer and the mimic need to have a conversation.
The mimic can speak with animals?
Yeah, always.
Sweet.
And I think that's good. I think there's some more camera finessing I want to do as well, but I don't know if I'll do that on camera. On stream or not on stream. Anyways, that's about it. That's all I got. We got dialogue stuff up and running.
Good progress.
This evening. Good art progress. All good stuff.
I have lizards.
You do have lizards.
Lizards and deers and cows. Oh my.
Okay. Cool. For now, though, this is going to be totally signing out.
Trixie's